The UniSAFE community brings together nearly 50 organizations who are taking a proactive stance in the fight against gender-based violence. At the European Science Foundation, we are deeply honored at the chance to work together with so many universities and research organizations that are taking voluntary action to address what is a universal problem affecting higher education and research environment across Europe. To present how the UniSAFE project's team fits into this larger context of gender-based violence, I have the honor of introducing our keynote speaker, Johanna Nelles, Executive Secretary to the Council of Europe Convention on Preventing and Combating Violence Against Women, also known as the Istanbul Convention. Johanna joined the Council of Europe's work on preventing and combating violence against women in 2006, and now heads the organization's Violence Against Women division, which looks after the monitoring of the implementation of the Istanbul Convention in its state parties. Johanna, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. Good morning to all of you. Thank you very much for this opportunity today to speak to the world of academia. It is an opportunity that I cherish for many, many reasons. Universities are teaching institutions that shape the academic minds and professionals of the future, which we all want to see included in our efforts to build a world free from violence against women, sexism, and negative gender stereotypes. Universities are also research institutions with a strong role to play in offering insights into what works and what doesn't in combating violence against women. Among many other things, universities also bring together young women and men from different walks of life at a defining moment in their lives and are therefore a place for many positive experiences. But we all know that for many students, they are also a place for negative experiences such as sexual harassment, stalking, and violence. So the initiative that you are launching today, the UniSAFE project, that brings together so many different universities and research institutions keen to eradicate gender-based violence from their campuses, is therefore extremely interesting because it can help to unmask the full extent of gender-based violence in such entities. And it can also identify the reasons for such violence and help introduce ways to support victims and to ultimately reduce the levels of victimization. The survey you are planning will be absolutely crucial for this and will help fill a gap in data that is becoming apparent through the work on the implementation of the Istanbul Convention. As someone who has worked on this convention since it was only a draft text, and even before, I am really pleased to see your initiative taking shape, and I am even more pleased to see that it is set within the context of the convention's standards. So that is why, in my speech to you today, I will briefly sketch the legal framework which this treaty offers for your work, and we'll give you some examples of promising practices and implementation that are emerging from the monitoring of the convention. As you may know, the Istanbul Convention is currently legally binding on 34 state parties who have each individually ratified this treaty. An independent group of experts called GREVIO, which is the Group of Experts on Action Against Violence Against Women and Domestic Violence, is mandated to assess the level of implementation in these 34 countries through individual and country-specific reports. It has assessed 22 already, with the reports on Poland and San Marino published these past weeks, and with the report number 23 on Slovenia due in October. The GREVIO reports assess the implementation in relation to all operational articles of the Convention. And these include, of course, several that are of relevance to your project. In particular, Article 14 of the Convention, which calls on state parties to include teaching material relating to equality between women and men and gender-based violence against women in formal curricula and also in informal educational facilities and at all levels of education. Other relevant articles include the general obligation to raise awareness of the different forms of violence against women and to invest in prevention by addressing the root causes of such violence, to carry out data collection and research, and to offer specialist support services for victims, to name just a few. So once Grevio issues its report, it is transmitted to the Committee of the Parties, which reviews it and adopts recommendations to the country in question. This makes it a peer-to-peer process, with state parties issuing recommendations to each other, with a period of 3 years for implementation. And from this process, we have seen many good examples of implementation emerge, but also many common challenges. Grevio looks at all areas of the Convention, as I mentioned, and these can be grouped into 4 Ps: prevention, protection and support for victims, prosecution, and integrated policies. One of the premises of the Istanbul Convention is that preventing and combating violence against women and domestic violence requires a comprehensive approach based on a set of holistic policies that interlink prevention with protection and prosecution, and that is mindful of the intersecting identities as much as the differing realities of the women and girls it is intended to protect. It is also very clear about the root causes and the structural nature of violence against women as emanating from the historically manifested unequal power relations between women and men, which have led to and which continue to lead to women's subordinate position compared with men and to their discrimination. The Convention therefore requires parties to establish criminal or other offenses that capture the different forms of violence against women, including sexual harassment, stalking, rape, etc., and to ensure swift and effective investigation and prosecution that is victim-centered and based on a gendered understanding of these experiences. And while it is a convention that focuses primarily on women and girls, without any discrimination as to their race, color, language, religion, national origin, migration status, gender identity, and sexual orientation, among many other grounds listed in the Convention, it encourages its state parties to apply the provisions of the Convention to all victims of domestic violence. And from the monitoring, we have seen that many state parties are indeed adapting their catalogue of criminal offences to align it with the Istanbul Convention. While the offences of rape and sexual violence, as well as physical violence, have of course been included in many criminal codes for a while, many other specific offences have now been added, in particular stalking offences, but also offences of forced marriage, female genital mutilation, and also sexual harassment. There is one detail that might be of interest here: the requirement to ensure that sexual harassment be subject to criminal or other legal sanction, no matter where it takes place. EU legislation has, of course, long required that EU member states offer robust legislation to address sexual harassment in the workplace. But the standards of the Istanbul Convention go beyond that and require criminal or other legislation that address sexual harassment anywhere, on the street, at work, in shops, at university, in sports and leisure activities. And while Grevio is seeing some action on this, it has called on many state parties to ensure criminal or other sanctions beyond the area of employment. There is still a focus on employment, in fact. It also called on many state parties to do more to raise awareness of the available mechanisms of redress that already exist and to collect data on their use in order to assess the effectiveness of the legal framework. Grevio also looks at digital expressions of violence against women, and in this context, it is seeing more and more legislation that addresses image-based abuse of any kind, but also including revenge porn, and of course, also stalking through digital means. Gravio views the online and digital dimension of violence against women as a continuum of the violence perpetrated offline, and will soon be issuing an interpretation of the Convention in this regard. This will be done in the form of a general recommendation, which Gravio is mandated to issue, and this will be published around November 25th. And this is an authoritative interpretation of the Convention by Gravio. It will explain in quite some detail how the provisions of the Istanbul Convention apply to digital experiences of violence and what state parties and others can do to address this through the four main pillars of prevention, protection, prosecution, and as part of a comprehensive policy. Going back to some of Gravio's findings, it is worth pointing out that responding to gender-based violence against women requires not only criminal law and prosecution, but also prevention and protection. As far as the prevention goes, Gravio has found that there is more room for evidence and needs-based primary prevention because most campaigns and awareness-raising efforts center on domestic violence as only one form of the many forms of violence covered by the Convention. Dedicated initiatives that would raise awareness of and address the root causes of forms of violence such as stalking, sexual harassment, rape, and sexual violence, as well as their digital expressions, are in fact much harder to come by. They exist, but not in such strong numbers. The education sector is one where this is addressed to some extent in some countries, but Gravio's findings in this regard reveal a mixed picture, rather. While some state parties have made significant efforts to ensure teachings on the different forms of violence against women and gender equality more widely, others are asked to step up their efforts and to develop, use, and evaluate appropriate teaching materials. To give you an example, Gravio praised the French network of persons responsible for the prevention of discrimination, which is a network set up by the Ministry of Culture and which requires institutions of higher education in the field of culture to designate and train a staff member to prevent and handle sexual and gender-based violence and harassment. And in addition to this, support is given to all higher education schools in the field of culture to adopt a charter of commitment to equality between women and men, which includes the prevention of violence and harassment. Turning to the issue of research and surveys, you will be aware that the Convention requires state parties to collect administrative data, to conduct population-based surveys, and to support research on all forms of violence against women covered by the Convention. In the EU, the Fundamental Rights Agency and the European Institute for Gender Equality collect administrative and survey data on violence against women in the member states, disaggregated for factors such as age, sex, and victim-perpetrator relationship. But there is a substantial gap in data collected on location or environment in which the violence has taken place. And Gravio has in fact seen many state parties that do not yet comply with the requirements for administrative data to be broken down by the sex, age, type of offense, relationship of the perpetrator to the victim, and location. And this makes it difficult to assess help-seeking behavior of women and girls for experiences of violence, and it does not allow conclusions to be drawn on how the criminal justice sector serves them. In terms of understanding the prevalence of violence, this is an area where, again, some action has been taken, but Gravio found that most national surveys focus on a select number of experiences of women and girls, and they're often, in fact, limited to domestic and sexual violence. Often, they are not carried out at regular intervals or are conducted as part of general surveys on health or other issues with a limited number of questions only, and hence they are not sufficiently dedicated. Gravio noted positively that Denmark and Austria, for example, carried out surveys that included also sexual harassment. And during its recent evaluation visit to Romania, Gravio was made aware of a study from 2015 on levels of sexual harassment, specifically in universities, which showed that 1 of 2 women reported sexual harassment. The high levels reported through these preliminary surveys indicates the potential extent of violence against women in higher education institutions, and therefore the serious need both for immediate intervention and further research. The UniSAFE project will therefore be instrumental in this. As far as research is concerned, Gravio has seen several state parties that invest quite significantly in research on violence against women, with state-funded research institutions playing an important role, such as the Swedish Research Centre on Men's Violence Against Women, or the Belgium Institute for Equality Between Women and Men. But in many reports, Gravio has called on governments to give more support to academic institutions and researchers to carry out research on violence against women, including by financially encouraging research in this area. Gravio has repeatedly stressed that research should contribute to the evaluation of policies and measures to prevent and combat violence against women, because in many state parties this was missing entirely or very weak. Gravio also identified a lack of research on violence against women who are experiencing intersectional discrimination, and that's why it encouraged state parties to conduct research on women with disabilities, elderly women, migrant women, and LGBTI women. And on many occasions, it called on research to focus on forms of violence other than domestic violence. If you're interested in looking more closely at the findings by Gravio in order to discover trends and challenges in the implementation of the convention on the whole, I would invite you to browse the Midterm horizontal review, which we published this May. And this is available on the Istanbul Convention website, and it offers an overview, article by article, of the implementation of the convention in 17 countries. We made this tool available to make the Gravio evaluation reports and findings more accessible because they're rather long, and we are hoping that good use will be made of this important document, including by academics such as yourselves maybe. So in this context, and before closing, let me point to some interesting developments around existing networks of universities against gender-based violence that are currently in operation in Europe and that you may in fact already be aware of. For example, there is UniRe, the University in Rete Against Gender Violence, which is a network of 9 universities across Italy working to implement the Istanbul Convention, including through training, research, data collection, awareness raising, and the development of tools to combat gender-based violence. This network may serve as a useful point of reference for research organizations across Europe to develop their own approaches. In addition, the Council of Europe recently set up a new initiative called OCEAN, or Open Council of Europe Academic Networks, which aims to promote the Council's more than 200 conventions among academia in Europe through national networks such as the UniRe in Italy. The preparatory phase of the OCEAN project has been finished, and this initiative will be launched during the upcoming Italian chairmanship of the Council of Europe, starting in November, with a launching conference and subsequent events and activities in a variety of Italian universities. In the long run, these networks will develop a number of activities that will help raise awareness among faculty and students as to the Council of Europe conventions generally, for example, through academic conferences, workshops, PhD programs, publications, national ocean hubs, national observatories, and much more. The world of academia, therefore, offers lots of potential to make human rights standards known, to research into their application on the ground, and as the UniSAFE project will hopefully show in the future, to uphold women's human right to a life without violence. And in this endeavor, I wish you all success. Thank you very much.